Good evening all, and welcome. We're going to be heading camping tonight, and we also have the pleasure of being joined by Papa Scare in tonight's video. If you enjoy his narration, be sure to check him out when we're done. I would also like to mention that tonight's video has some pretty gory scenes. You have been forewarned. But for now, it's time to get comfortable. Like, subscribe, and press the bell icon, and let the darkness take control. I'm a pretty avid backpacker in the Pacific Northwest. Sometimes I'll hike for days on end without seeing another person. I think it's exhilarating, being completely alone. There's really no feeling like it. You get used to it, but personally I can never help but be on edge. The environment is completely serene and friendly, but there's a constant feeling in the back of your mind. It's hard to put your finger on it. Most of the time you'll be chugging along, comfortable in your mind, but when you stop for rest or to fill up with water, you can't help but look over your shoulder. Nothing bothers me out much in the woods. I've run into brown bears, had elk trample through camps late at night and much more. But one night was different. I was on a deep backwoods hike in the late fall of the season. It was pretty cold, but the snow hadn't quite started falling yet. I like that. In fact, I usually plan my trips this way. The forest ranger I spoke to when I was organizing the trip said I was the only hiker she knew of who'd be up there at that time. I was using dispersed camping sites so far off the beaten path they didn't have fire pits. That night was 5 or 6 miles from the trail into the area. I set up camp at a site about 100 yards from a stream, close enough that a faint babbling was audible. I lit a fire, cooked dinner, read for a while, and was settling down to sleep. I lay listening for a while to the sounds of the woods and the creek. Just as I was nodding off, I think I hear voices. Nothing distinct, no clear words, but clearly a group of people were having a good time, laughing, maybe telling a story around a campfire. A feeling of dread came over me. I thought I shouldn't leave the tent. Fear like I've never felt engulfed me. All the hairs on my arms and legs and on the back of my neck stood on end. I lay there for a while in a panic, the voices carrying on laughing indistinctly. After a while they receded into the background noise. I still didn't leave the tent. I was too afraid. The next morning, after a very short night's sleep, I searched the surrounding area and the path to the site. A few shoe prints I found were faded and worn around the edges, too old and too few to be from this size of the group I heard. I tried to shrug it off as nerves. Maybe nervousness got the best of me, but I couldn't shake a certain tension. I made good time to the next site, the last of the trip, looking around a little more than usual, but still no one to be seen. That site had no stream. Dry camping isn't a blast, but it's doable if you pack enough water for cooking and drinking for the night. It was a lot quieter, just the chirps of bugs and the wind rustling the trees. I cooked my dinner and stayed up a good while after dark, sitting on a log, looking at the stars, and listening to the sounds of the forest, trying to hear the voices from the night before, but there was nothing. I turned in for the night, stretching every act out. I lay there, restless for what felt like hours. Finally, calm comes over me, and then it's back. Nothing threatening or particularly scary, just the sounds of a group of 10 to 15 people having a good time, barely audible above the background noise. This time I'm calm, and there's what seems to be an internal dialogue in the back of my mind. Why not join them? Sounds like they're having fun. I'd really rather stay here. This is entirely unconscious and goes on for a while. I'd never experienced anything like this. I was worried that I'd lost it. And after a while the noises faded away into the white noise, and I felt that I was alone. The next day I packed as quickly as I could to get out of there quickly. During the day I was more at ease, like I had always been in the past. I was relieved when I got back to the car and started back home. I told the story a few times, and every time I felt a little bit of dread from the first night. I really had no reason to feel strongly about what happened. I just heard strange noises in the forest, nothing extraordinary, but I felt it. On one occasion, I told the story to my teacher, who's a native. He got quiet for a minute, then said I had run into stick Indians. He said that it was good I didn't leave the tent. Stick Indians are evil and dangerous beings that prey on children and women. The look on his face was sober. He told me not to go back to that place again. These spirits are extremely aggressive and attack and kill at the slightest provocation, including even saying their Salish names, which he refused to do. Whenever the subject comes up, I get that same fear in me. As I write this, I'm thousands of miles from those sites, and my arms are still quaking.
A couple of days ago, my boyfriend and I went camping in eastern Germany. We had found an incredible spot to set up our tent, right by a river in the woods. We parked the car about 20 meters away from us, behind a bush. After we set everything up, we sat by the river and enjoyed the sunset. It was getting darker, and we could hear the animals around us, getting more active. We were well aware that we would hear some creepy noises at night. Anyway, my boyfriend decided to bring our food to the car to not attract any more animals that night. I stayed at our spot, enjoying the view. As soon as he walked to the car, this strange feeling got to me. A feeling of fear and alert. I kept checking on my boyfriend, who jokingly said something like, "Please keep looking after me," which is also untypical for him. Maybe it's worth to mention that neither him nor I are easily scared. We're both tough and had a knife with us too. When we got back to our spot, he kneeled down next to me and said, "I heard something really heavy walking in those woods." I thought he was joking, trying to scare me, but he was serious, and I could see how uneasy he was. He said we should have a look with our knife and flashlights, so we did. About halfway to the car, I could hear it too. Some really heavy footsteps. First I thought, oh well, a deer. But not soon after, I noticed that it clearly sounded like bipedal footsteps. In that moment, I got chills and felt an insane moment of panic. We stood there frozen, staring into the woods. When we moved, it moved. When we stood still, it stood still. It clearly mocked our steps. That went on for 2 minutes. We've had enough. I rushed back to the tent as my boyfriend stood guard with a knife on hold. I grabbed everything valuable and necessary, and we rushed to the car. As I grabbed the stuff, I could hear it moving in the bushes. As soon as we were in the car, we locked the door and drove off to gain some distance. We parked the car in a parking lot and talked about what just happened. My boyfriend said that when he brought the food to the car, he already had a weird gut feeling of something or someone lurking. The reason for him asking me to keep checking on him. As soon as he heard the steps, he said he literally got chills down his whole spine. He also saw some sort of vague outline of something, but couldn't identify anything. He's never felt more altered and panicked in his whole life. Neither did I. It was pure survival and gut instincts to get away from whatever it was in the bush. We slept in the car that night. Now he thinks it was a creepy human who was up to no good. I think that is a possibility, but that it might be something different. Do you guys have any ideas of what it might have been, apart from a human? We do not have any large predators in Germany. Only wolves, which are rare and not bipedal.
Several of the countries I did work in were, and still are, the side of decade-long civil wars, insurrections and genocides that ravaged them socially, politically and economically, and structurally. Given we worked in the remote wild lands of these countries protecting the species people pay millions for like elephants and rhinos, you'd figure that one of our biggest fears would be poaching units. Many of these units were linked to Al-Shabaab, the LRA, Al-Qaeda, and other such terror groups. Look up the Kenyan Westgate Mall massacre, and you'll see the result of money from high-end poaching. However, we were usually well equipped and trained to handle pretty much any situation that might befall us, and we had plenty of violent and non-violent encounters under our belts. That said, the thing that made me the most nervous in many war-torn regions like Angola, Mozambique, was the potential for unexploded landmines left over from the sometimes up to 30 years civil war. I was especially nervous because we worked in very remote locations where groups like the Halo Trust, who remove mines, didn't really go as their priority as more populated centers. In some cases, we had to hire minesweeper-type vehicles to drive ahead of a column, going down unmapped roads to prevent from being blown up. I think what made me the most nervous about them is how impossible they were to spot. I had been trained to scan my surroundings for glints of equipment, i.e. scopes, guns, watches, etc. It's amazing what can give your position away to the trained eye. Tips of horns in tall grass, like Cape buffalo, that will mess you up something quick. Listen for changes in the sounds of the environment, like a sudden silence, or particular animals' alarm calls may indicate predators like people or leopards. Smells cue you in: death, campfire, cordite, and you can usually spot a puff adder before stepping on one. Mines, however, were often completely invisible, especially after 5 to 30 years in the dirt. One time, one of our guides/trainers, a former Selous scout, found one in the bush and pointed it out, and showed the 2 little metal prongs that popped ever so slightly out the dirt. You would likely never see it, until it was too late. I'd been working for about a year at this point, so wasn't green, and we were in Angola working with an organization to do some mapping, species surveying, and anti-poaching type work. We were walking along a dirt road, overgrown with scraggy shrubs and such. The nearest village was about a 4 to 5 mile walk away, and there were several amputees who had stepped on mines at some point. The country has been estimated to have up to 20 million landmines, although no one really knows. We got reckless and comfortable. Scary how easy that is to do. I was 3 back in the column, about 30 yards from our point man. He had a pair of binoculars and a rangefinder and was spotting animals for a survey we were conducting. Suddenly, he disappeared in a cloud of smoke and dust that billowed up from the ground and engulfed him with a sharp, metallic bang. The blast wasn't super powerful. Landmines are usually designed to maim, and little pebbles pelted my face. The cloud of chalky dust soon enveloped the column, and everyone hacked and coughed. Our armed unit quickly found concealment and set up behind the blast, and myself and another followed the point man's tracks to avoid setting off anything else. He laid in a crumpled heap, surrounded by charred dirt. I grabbed his web gear, look up Vietnam web gear and you'll get an idea, and drag him back out of the thick dust. The smell of explosive accelerants burnt up my nose. As I dragged him, I noticed a trail of blood coming from his legs. It looked like the scene from a horror movie where the monster has had a good bite at his victim, and there was a long trail of blood. I stopped and jumped over to his front leg. His right leg below the knee was gone. A pulverized mass of bone and singed cloth remained, blood everywhere. I immediately snatched 2 tourniquets from my belt, got them up and over the wound, cranking the first down as tightly as possible before adding the second. The point man, Sandil, screamed for the first time. He was a tough dude, But as they say, the tourniquets often hurt worse than the injury. His left leg was badly shredded too, but we stopped the bleeding with pressure bandages and wound packing. We wrapped him up tight in mylar blanket to prevent shock. We stretched him back down the road and managed to reach a rescue company via satellite phone. Within the hour, he was whisked away. He ended up getting surgery in Joburg or Cape Town, I forget which, after a long flight and a few hospital stops on the way. He lost his right leg, but his left recovered, and last I heard he was working as guide in a small private reserve in KwaZulu-Natal. Anyway, that's the reason why my girlfriend gets annoyed when I don't talk about it while we're hiking, because I'm too busy scanning for mines, poachers, predators, and other stuff that isn't there.
My boyfriend and I were camping in Peter Lougheed Provincial Park this past summer. On the last night of our stay, as I'm falling asleep, my boyfriend tells me I've been pushing him off his side of the air mattress and asks me to give him room. I was trying to steal heat from him as he's a human furnace. Sounds good. We go to sleep. I wake up to him shoving me, and I think I'm crowding him by accident, so I move over a little. He shoves me harder, and I'm annoyed now because I already moved, and I'm tired, so somewhat loudly I say, "I'm moving," and he grabs me and shushes me. I know something is wrong and am awake straight away. He whispers very softly, "Do you hear something?" And right away, I hear the unmistakable exhaling huff of a bear right by my head. My heart is pounding because at this point, I can hear it sniffing us and huffing, which is not good if you know grizzlies. My boyfriend says, "We need to get to our truck," and I agree. But from what I can hear, the bear is between our tent and truck. Luckily, we have command start, and our truck has a very aggressive start. So when my boyfriend started the truck, I heard some crashing through the trees, and we both ran to the truck. We drove a lap around our campground to make sure the bear hadn't gone into anyone else's sight, but didn't see it. We slept in the truck until it was light out, and let the wildlife hotline in the area know before we left. We started second-guessing ourselves because this all happened at about 1:30 a.m. But when we were packing up the tent that next day, we found coarse brown hair all over the side of the tent where our heads were, and on the grill of the truck. I've never been so terrified and full of adrenaline in my life. When I was a teenager, I used to go out camping by myself. I had a spot where I liked that was across a few fences from my grandparents' house in the middle of nowhere. One of the places I cut through was a pasture full of cattle. Around cattle, especially cattle unfamiliar with me, I try to be very careful to not spook them, but otherwise cows are pretty easygoing. This was about a mile from my grandparents' house and probably about 2 from my destination. The one time I am thinking of, the last time, I slipped through the fence to find the cattle already freaked out. They were insanely agitated about something I was not aware of, so I stayed well clear of them as I went through the pasture. I had a good time camping that night and packed up the next morning. As I went back into that pasture, however, there was this ridiculously bad smell. It smelled like a skunk had fought with something in a fertilizer barrel, and the barrel broke open. It was awful. I tried to look around for the cows to make sure they were not going to surprise me, and I could not find them. They were just gone. There was some brush and trees though, so I thought they were just out of sight. I keep walking through the place to get home, and the smell is so bad that I set down my stuff at the fence line and decide to investigate. Well, I found the cows. All of them were shot and ripped apart. Someone had carefully shot them in the head with a bolt gun style thing, or hit them hard enough with a pointy object to bust through their skulls, and eviscerated all of them. They had also drugged them all into a little shallow ravine and piled the bodies up. It was horrible. I hightailed it out of there, back to my gear. My stuff was gone, as in, I set it right there on this rock, and it is not within eyeshot. A quick glance showed me that there was not anything ripped or fallen out, so something, or someone, had picked it up while I was 200 yards away for less than 5 minutes. I think Usain Bolt would not have been able to catch me on the way home. I never heard anything else about those cows, and I did not go back to the old camping spot again. Second story. My cousin is with the Forest Service in the Montana-Wyoming area, and I decided to go up there with her to literally test the waters. She does hydrology and has to ride out to the middle of nowhere to test streams and snow runoff to ensure no contaminants. So I thought that sounded fun and wanted to do a bit of a tour with her. We were going to have to camp out there for 2 nights, so we packed up all our gear in saddlebags or saddle bundles and started out. The first day and night was amazing. Beautiful scenery and amazing air quality. It really is so peaceful out there. I love that area and wish I got to go up there more often. Anyway, we started out on the second day, and my cousin said, "You want to see something weird?" Of course I said yes. So she led me on a bit of a side journey into this tiny little ravine. We ended up traveling about 2 hours away from our actual path we had laid out. At the very end of this fold in the land, she dismounts and tells me to get off my horse too. We tie them up in this gorgeous little clearing, and she tells me to follow this tiny wildlife path and bring our little rechargeable radio. It is one of those you can plug in or wind up, and it also acts as a lantern if you really need it to, but that kills the batteries quickly. I do, and out in the middle of nowhere, there is a huge coil of wire sticking out of the ground. The wire itself is not weirdly large, like some buried transmission wire, but small, like 10 or 12 gauge wiring for a house. It trailed off into the brush and trees, so naturally, I decided to follow the damn thing out of curiosity. My cousin trails behind me as I do, and this wire, after coming straight up from the ground, is strung across limbs of trees, then back to the ground. Then it snakes around rocks and finally dead ends into an outlet. That outlet is mounted on the side of a desk. It looks like a schoolteacher's desk from when I was growing up, with a metal base and a pseudo-wood plastic top thing. No chair, no building, no nothing. Just this outlet and this desk. I'm staring confused at this desk in the middle of a forest when my cousin takes the radio, pulls out the cord, and plugs it into the outlet. It then lit up and started blaring static. The wire was being fed from somewhere. Now, the place where we were had no road access, no buildings for many miles, and no other people around. And yet, there was a live outlet. Weird as hell. No spooky jump scares or bodies, just one lone, powered desk in the middle of the woods. I wish I had taken a picture of it.
I have a friend who is a trail ranger. Basically a ranger who can't get you in trouble. He told me about this time he was gathering illegally placed wildlife cameras and knocking down hunting stands, feeders and blinds with another actual ranger. The other ranger wasn't feeling so well, so he said he was going to head back as it's a 1-hour ATV ride. My friend finishes up with the last one when he hears voices. Keep in mind, he's far off the beaten path. He calls out, and no one replied. As it was getting dark, he started to head back and found that his ATV wouldn't start. He then noticed that the battery was not connected anymore. He connected it and started to drive, but it wasn't going very fast. Less than a half-mile later, the whole thing died. He radioed back basically saying, "Hey guys, I need someone to come pick me up." He told him they would be able to do it in an hour. He asked if the other guy got back and they said no. He settled down and started a small fire, but before long he heard voices again. It's dark. He is not happy. The voices sounded like an argument now. Someone was angry and yelling at someone else who sounded more scared. He called out and asked if anyone needed help. The voices didn't seem to care. He guessed they had to be at least 1,000 feet away. He radioed again, and they said that they were having trouble finding what path he might be on and haven't left yet. He asked them to just get the other ranger to tell them about where they are, because he left with the iPad that had the map. They said that he still wasn't back. About 3 more minutes go by, and he hears the voices start up again. He decides to walk to them, hoping that maybe they can stop being drunk and maybe have a map. He walked in their direction, but the voices seemed to be getting further as he got closer. Finally, after 20 minutes, he gave up and walked back. He got a radio call and they said the other guy was found passed out covered in vomit and was being taken to hospital, but he crossed off everywhere they found a stand, so they have a general idea of where he is. Then the radio died, and then the voices came back. Bored out of his mind, he decided to listen to what they were arguing about and picked up things like, "Well, it wasn't yours to take. I don't care. You know better," and so on. His guess was 2 hunters arguing over a kill. He then heard the one shout something intelligible, then silence, then bang, a gunshot. He doused his fire and hid. After that he heard nothing, just his breathing for the next half an hour until he saw ATV lights. He told the guy picking him up everything, and they called back. They had people looking for 3 hours and found nothing. They came back the next day with police and dogs. After about an hour, a shallow grave was found in it, and a long, dead man who had clearly been shot in the face was there. It was a skeleton that was there for years. So either the argument he heard just ended with a bang and both parties went home last night, or he heard the murder of someone from years ago.
Throughout the US and seen some strange things. My brother and I came across an abandoned trailer town of sorts that scared the hell out of us. We also came across a rundown town, really small, out in New Mexico, that seemed to have one person living in it. We based that on the fact that there was still some food and supplies there that were fairly fresh, perhaps just a few days old. Spent a couple of days there trying to find the person, just to find out why they were staying in the town. Never found a person. We found the skeletal remains of an unknown number of deer, ranging from bucks to fawn, ensnared in a barbed wire fence that encompassed a 10 by 10 area of the Ozarks. A few of the skulls topped the fence posts, and there was one post in the middle of this area that had decaying deer bodies wrapped around it. It looked to be 2, but there were only 6 hooves jutting out of the wreckage. We found a dummy hanging from a tree while in the Yukon Territory of Canada, literally out in the middle of the woods. No reason for it, as far as we know. And we also came across a dead junkie on a road out of Olympia. Obvious OD, as he had his arm tied and a needle in hand. Eyes were glazed over and staring straight ahead, mouth slightly ajar.
My friends and I went canoe camping in a new provincial park. We had this neat trip planned. We'd get flown into the middle of the park with our canoes and canoe our way out over the course of the week. First night, everything is pretty normal and cool. Next day, we go over to the head of the trail up a mountain. Mountain is a bit of a misnomer. It's Ontario, so our mountains are pretty small. The base of the trail is in a campsite. We get out of our canoes and go up to the campsite to find the trail. The campsite is a wreck, like clothes tossed all around in the mud, a dehydrated meal that someone clearly hacked into with a knife barely eaten, snack wrappers and trash. A couple of pairs of shoes, 3 different tarps torn down and muddy, a sleeping bag, I think. Things you wouldn't expect to be left behind even with the messiest of campers. No sign of anyone around, but plenty of evidence that there had been at least 3 to 5 people here. No signs of canoeing. Keep in mind, this is a lake you can only access via several days of hiking and/or canoeing via plane. To this day, we don't know what happened there. It was a week before we got out of the park ourselves, and we were in a rough state when we did. It was a very rainy trip, so we never really found out what had happened. Some members of our party said they saw a canoe at the site the previous night, because they wanted to be at the site, but it had been occupied. But we woke up hella early and didn't see anything leave. Our best guess is still that someone had an emergency, maybe hypothermia. It was really rainy and they called out an emergency rescue, and in their haste, left the majority of their stuff behind.
I was out camping with my dog one night, along the Mogollon Rim of Arizona. It was dark and we were sitting around the campfire when we hear something behind a bush close to our camp. Instead of my dog barking at it, he begins to whimper. I don't think nothing of it and just tended to the fire. After a couple of minutes, we hear some more noises from a different bush. This time my dog gets up and goes over to the tent and scratches the door because he wants to go in. I toss a couple of rocks in the direction I heard the noise, and nothing happened. I'm spooked now, so I toss a couple of pieces of wood on the fire and climb into my tent with my dog, hoping that the light from the fire would keep whatever was out there away. We eventually fall asleep and, luckily, had no other disturbances during the night. The next morning, I go out behind the bushes where we heard the noises and found mountain lion tracks that were circling around our tent. I'm sure glad we didn't go looking at night when I heard the noises.
I was once canoeing the boundary waters between Minnesota and Canada. These aren't your normal backyard ponds. The boundary waters are thousands of enormous lakes, interconnected with each other. Think mini Great Lakes. We had been canoeing and camping along the lakes for about a week at this point. We didn't really have an itinerary, just planned to boat and camp and fish and live off the land for 2 weeks. We had a GPS and a sat phone to call a helicopter for pickup whenever we were done. Anyway, about a week in, we were set to canoe for a few hours to the next lake. An hour or so in, and we are at the center of an extremely long and narrow lake. Unfortunately, a storm started to blow in, and the waves on the lake swelled to 2+ feet, too much for our dinky canoes. We pulled off to a random clearing on the shore and set up camp in a rush to avoid being totally thrashed by a rainstorm. We just set camp and hunkered down for the night. By the next morning it had cleared up. We started walking up to the coast of the lake about 200 feet from our camp, looking for a good fishing spot. What we actually found was another campsite. However, it was absolutely wrecked. Trash strewn everywhere, tent collapsed and torn, clothes on the ground. At first, we were just disgusted, like who could be responsible for this, or left their food out to be eaten for bears. The more we looked around though, the weirder things seemed. For one, their garbage was still hoisted into a tree to keep it safe from bears, but the whole bag was ripped open despite being 30 feet in the air. Second, everything except the canoes was still at the campsite. Clothes, packs, food, rope, pans, like serious sets of hiking equipment, enough for 2 or 3 people. Half of it was trashed and torn open, mostly the packs, tents and clothes. The other half was totally untouched, but thrown on the ground, like someone noped the hell out of there in nothing but their long johns, ditching hundreds of dollars in gear in the process. We waited a few hours and eventually called it back to our helicopter crew, but they hadn't been aware of anybody else or gotten any distress calls. We eventually left everything and moved camp. Everyone was pretty upset by it, and a day or 2 later we just ended the whole trip early because it seemed like no one wanted to be out there anymore. It was the weirdest thing I've ever seen. First, we thought it was a bear attack, but there was food left uneaten, and I've seen bear attacks on camps before, but nothing like this. Bears rip open packs and go after food, and are generally pretty easy to scare away. What sticks with me is why all their clothes and packs were still there, after half being totally destroyed and the other half be untouched. I still don't get it. I've done a lot of other hiking and camping and rafting and biking all around the country, and I've never had as strange encounter as that one.
Guide camp in Victorian bushland. Girl Guides are a paramilitary exercise in the British tradition. My troop was competing in a camp competition. We were the furthest from the mother house, down the hill and put out of sight of every other campsite. One night, we were all dead asleep in our tent. 8 preteen girls. We heard snuffling and loud grunting around the tent. Then, the tent started to move and shake. This was an ex-army 8-person tent. Wooden beams and something was shaking the tent. One beam started to come loose and 2 girls made a run to the mother house. The rest of us tried to keep our tent up. Then we heard a louder thud and screaming, "Get up, get up, get up!" By now, we'd woken half the campsite. Turns out a family of wombats was upset. We were on prime grazing area and was pushing the annoyance away. One of the girls had tripped over a wombat. So, that's the time I thought I was going to die by a wombat.
I was hiking the Hoh rainforest on the Olympic Peninsula in Washington back in '03. I was trying to do this really snazzy hike from the ocean to Mount Olympus. Well, day 1 is a blast, get everything accomplished. Day 2, fog, as thick as anything as you can imagine. I can't even get a decent GPS fix, so I'm pretty much blind. But I know if I follow the Hoh River upstream, I'll get to one of the campsites I'm going for. The day goes by and the fog isn't clearing up at all. I get to a fairly big clearing and set up my tent. I grab a power bar and chill out as it starts getting to the darkest black I've ever experienced. I'm seriously a bit unnerved at the whole thing, not scared as much as just anxious. But about 2 in the morning, I start hearing this huffing noise like Darth Vader without the helmet on. My imagination starts to go freaky and I reach for my flashlight. I pull the drawstring on my tent a little, very quietly, and poke my head out. Still dark as death, and I hear the noise coming from maybe 5 feet to my right. At this point, I'm seriously rethinking my belief in Sasquatch. I poke my flashlight out and turn it on. I'm on my feet away from a massive Roosevelt elk who'd lost his way in the dark too. He sees the flashlight and bolts the other way, tags a tree, and knocks himself clean out. I laid in the tent until I hear a groan, a bunch of commotion, and the big guy grunt away.
About 20 years ago, I had just finished my degree and was bummed because I couldn't find a job. A former roommate / good friend and I went on an overnight backpack trip near Burr Oak State Park in southeast Ohio. About 2 a.m., we were awoken in our tent by the sound of dozens of horses being ridden all around us. We could hear muted conversation, harness jingling, hoofs clopping, and we could feel it shaking the ground. We laid in our tent, and the sound just kept on, like a whole convoy was passing right beside us. After a few minutes, we unzipped the tent, and the sounds immediately ceased, and nothing was there. It was freaky. We were afraid they were going to ride over us, it was so intense. I have no idea who or what it was, but we're camped on a trail that had been used by John Morgan Hunt's Confederate raiders during the Civil War. Not a logical explanation, but it was deafening. There were so many horses. I can still hear men's voices murmuring as they rode by. Next morning, not a single hoofprint to be found.
A number of years ago, I was in the northern end of British Columbia, in the islands out by Port Hardy. I set up camp right by the ocean close to the shore, did the normal catch of fish, cook it for dinner on the campfire thing perfectly easily. A few hours pass and it's getting dark. I climb into the tent and fall asleep quickly, but I get awoken by extremely heavy breathing on the beach from something big in the area of my fire. But the tide was in now, so the waves would have covered it. My first thought is bear, but on the island where I was, bear was not common enough at all to the point where there hadn't been one documented ever. This is blasting through my mind, but then the urban tales of Bigfoot run through my mind. At this point, I'm thinking there's no such thing as Bigfoot, so what the hell is it? I gained the courage to open my tent, shine my flashlight around but didn't see anything, so I get out of it. I'm shining my light around when I hear it again. This huge breath, but followed by a small splash. I focus my light on the beach where I see a massive orca rolling around on the kelp right about where my fire was. This behemoth of a marine animal scared the living hell out of me, but it turned into being one of the most amazing events I've ever witnessed. As I sat watching this massive animal rolling and playing yards from me, I noticed more of them just offshore, bobbing there, probably half asleep. Needless to say, I didn't sleep until after they left. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. As always, I hope you enjoyed tonight's stories. If you did, be sure to let me know in the usual way. I'd also like to extend a huge thank you to Papa Scare for joining us in tonight's campsite venture. If you liked his content, you can check it out. We do pretty similar stuff. Link in the description and shown on screen shortly. A huge thanks to my amazing members and patrons for your contributions. You really are all amazing and it means a hell of a lot to me. So thank you. But for now, links on screen. Hopefully see you again soon. Stay awesome and see you in the next one.
Getting random texts from wrong numbers has become a norm in today's society. And while most of these interactions are ended quickly by saying, "wrong number," mine was different, as I found a friend in the random stranger who texted me. It was great at first, but by the end of the whole ordeal, I was left with nothing but a chilling tale to tell for the rest of my life. My name is Daisy Moore, and I was 14 years old when this incident happened. I had just entered the hell that was high school, and I sure wasn't ready for it. My dad, Mr. Moore, who was an amazing father, was also the janitor at my high school, and that didn't sit well with people as they stigmatized me for it. The first few weeks were brutal. I was alone, I had no friends to talk to, and to top it all off, I didn't even have a phone as my dad had a lot of bills to worry about. After the first month, I was sure I was going to lose it and drop out. But by the end of the week, something really special happened. I was walking out of class when my dad walked up to me and said, "Hey Daisy, look what I got from the Lost and Found." He then proceeded to show me an iPhone. Before I could say anything, he continued with, "I know I can't really afford to buy you one, and you've been wanting one for a while now, so I decided to give it to you, as it has been sitting in the Lost and Found for over a year now." I remember tearing up a bit, as it was a really huge deal for me. Due to the fact that I didn't grow up in a rich home, I learned to appreciate every single thing that was given to me. And even though I knew he didn't buy it, it was the thought that counted. I then hugged my dad and thanked him for the gift. After that, I made my way home with a huge smile on my face as I held my very first iPhone in my hand. That night, before I went to bed, I had gotten a text from an unknown number. I found it really odd as I literally had no friends who would text me, so I knew that the person probably texted me by accident. I opened the text to see a message that read, "Hi, I'm Nathan." I then responded with, "I'm sorry, I think you have the wrong number." My text was then quickly replied with, "Nope, I'm sure it's the right number cause I know every single digit like it's my own number." I was a bit perplexed by his response, and before I could say anything, the stranger called Nathan immediately changed the topic by saying, "So, tell me about yourself." From there, one thing led to another, and before I knew it, we hit it off as we began to talk all through the night. A few months had passed since the night I met Nathan, and I found myself always talking to him every single time I had a chance to. I'd gotten to know him pretty well as I found out that he was just a year older than me, and that he too was also struggling to make it through high school. The latter gave us a lot of common ground to talk about. We also had a lot of similar interests and hobbies, which made talking to him always worthwhile. And while I thoroughly enjoyed our conversations, I had noticed that there were a few odd things about Nathan. For starters, I knew we lived in the same town, so when Nathan would say things like, "It's fucking cold out here," in the middle of the summer, when I was sure the sun was scorching people outside, I'd always become a bit confused. In addition to that, I also noticed that whenever I asked Nathan to send me a picture of himself, he always looked terribly pale in the pictures he sent, and he was constantly sitting in a school bus every single picture. While I knew that all these weird occurrences weren't normal, I didn't say anything about it, as he was basically the only friend that I had to talk to. I also didn't care about it, as I just assumed that he was going through a weird phase like every other kid in high school. At the time, I said to myself that nothing was going to make me stop talking to him, as I knew that even if we hadn't met in real life, he was the first true friend I had gotten in a long while. But by the next Monday morning, I began to second guess that decision as a horrific realization had dawned on me. That Monday morning, the school had gathered all the students in the hall to watch a tribute video. Once everyone had settled down, the school began to play a video in memorial of the 15 students who died in a terrible accident last winter when they were going for an excursion on the school bus. They began to explain how the bus swerved off the road and crashed into the mildly frozen lake. The ice gave way under the weight of the bus, and both the driver and all the children died in the freezing water as the bus sunk deeper. Now, I already knew all about the incident, as it was a tragedy that shook our entire little town. But I wasn't prepared for what happened next as they began to show the pictures of the dead children. Everything was fine till the end of the slideshow, as the last picture read, "In honor of the principal's son, Nathan Walker, who also tragically died in the accident." I stopped dead as I saw them display the picture of the exact same person I had been talking to for the past 6 months. Chills went up my spine as I was temporarily paralyzed with fear. Our school principal, Mr. Walker, then took to the stage to give a touching speech. He spoke for a while, but he finally ended the speech with, "I tried to call him that morning, but apparently he had lost his phone. There's nothing in this world that I wouldn't give to hear his voice one last time." I left the hall after that, feeling shook. My dad had noticed, so he asked me if I was okay. I told him I was fine and I was just having a bad day. When I got home that day, I began to frantically text Nathan, asking him all manner of questions. But instead of receiving his usually quick replies, nothing but silence answered me. It took me a few weeks to realize that he had completely ghosted me, as he stopped replying to any of my texts. Going through the aftermath of the incident alone was driving me insane, so I tried to tell my dad. But the concerned look on his face when I told him that I had been talking to the principal's dead son for about 6 months made me reconsider my decision, as I immediately passed it off as a joke. I still tried to tell other people when I got the chance, but no one believed me. No one except the school principal, Mr. Walker. I really don't know why I decided to talk to him about it, but I was really scrambling for solutions, and I realized that no one else would understand except his father. After telling him everything that happened, Mr. Walker got up, hugged me, and cried. He then told me that he believed me, as he knew without a doubt that the iPhone I held in my hand belonged to his very own son, Nathan Walker. I'm 24 years old now, and I can still remember every single detail of this incident that happened over 10 years ago. While it was a very creepy experience, I managed to be at peace with it and see the whole ordeal in a lighter tone. And apart from being a really frightening incident, it did give me a lot of bragging rights, as nowadays, I always tell people I once had an iPhone that could talk to the dead.
Hey guys, I see many of you commenting on my videos that this channel deserves 1 million subscribers. But I also see the percent of people who watch my videos aren't actually subscribed to the channel. So, if you like the content, want to support my channel, and want to see this channel reach 1 million subscribers, or maybe 500,000 subscribers, then go ahead, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. It's free, and you can always change your mind later.
The only reason I am sharing this horrifying incident is to warn everyone. I just pray to God none of you ever make the same mistake as me, because it can ruin you forever. I recently moved into a studio apartment in New York. My family lives here, so things got pretty easy for me. I work in this multinational company as a telecaller. My job is easy and pays well to help me go on with my life. Being the only child, I always got everything I asked for. Apart from my many interests, buying gadgets is one of my big fascinations. I love iPhones and have been using them for a long time now. But I have another bad habit, which is the main reason why I am in this grave situation in the first place. I am a very whimsical person, and I tend to forget my stuff wherever I go. Like, I just lose things without getting drunk. Many times, I got them back, and many times, I didn't. This particular story is about the one time when I lost my iPhone, and my life turned into a living hell. It was a Saturday night, and I had plans to go to a nightclub with my friends. One can call me a party animal. My best friend Jennifer never leaves me alone after I get drunk in a nightclub. But that night, evil was waiting for me eagerly. As we entered the club, the red and blue neon lights were rushing everywhere. People were dancing like crazy with the loud music played by the DJ. I immediately tried some tequila shots and jumped onto the dance floor. My friends were dancing with me, and we were having a great time. After a moment of drunken feet, I decided to go sit at the bar and have some water to calm down a bit. But I didn't want to vomit like last time. As I sat at the bar and ordered some water, I noticed a man in his late 30s sitting at some distance and smiling in a very odd way. I took out my phone and clicked some selfies to post them on Facebook later. I was trying hard not to look at the man, but his rich appearance mixed with an odd smile made it difficult. In that club, he was the only one wearing a suit like he was coming right from a board meeting. I have been here for a long time, and I knew these kind of men very well. They like spending money on girls who are willing to sleep with them. A shrewd idea came to mind. I thought, what harm will come if I smile at him a bit? Maybe he will pay for my drinks and we will flirt a bit, and that will be it. So, without giving this terrible idea much thought, I smiled back at him. As soon as he saw that, he got up and came to me. Sitting right next to me, he said, "I have been noticing you for a long time now. You truly are beautiful." I couldn't help but laugh at his silly old pickup line. "What is your name?" "You can call me Steve." "Well, Steve, what do you do for a living?" "I own a company." "What is your name?" I wasn't willing to share much because I was pretty sure he was lying about his name. So I said, "My name is Lily, and I am studying at NYU." Honestly, I am a petite, average height woman, so that lie wasn't unbelievable. He smiled again and said, "Can I buy you a drink, Lily?" "Of course." He bought me not one, but a couple of drinks, and I went on with the casual flirting without thinking what danger it could bring. He was talking about how rich he is and all that he thought would be impressive to a young, naive college girl. While listening to him, my phone popped up with a notification, and I saw Jennifer texting me. "Stop using this poor man for free drinks," she texted. I couldn't help but laugh, and Steve said, "Is that your boyfriend texting you?" The question surfaced so unexpectedly that I couldn't say anything for a few seconds. I stared at him and replied, "That's none of your business? Come on, don't waste your time behind such jobless college boys. I can give you so much more, okay? Let's finish these drinks, then I will take you to my penthouse. You'll love the view from my balcony." "Excuse me, what makes you think I will go to your penthouse?" "What? This is why you smiled back at me, right?" "I'm sorry, but I'm not getting you. You're so naive. I got your hint way back, girl. We should spend the night together." I was stunned to see his audacity, and I realized what damage I have done just to get some free drinks. I got up and said, "Look, I am sorry. I was just casually flirting. It didn't mean anything, and I would like to pay you back for your drinks. I was just drunk and I didn't think things through." He grabbed my hand and said in a creepy tone, "Just say yes now, and I won't have to spike your drink." What the hell? I couldn't keep up with this creep anymore, and out of fear and anger, I slapped him right away, and my friends came rushing to the bar. They escorted me out of the club, and Steve sat there quietly. He didn't scream, didn't react, just stared at me without blinking until I was out of his sight. I got into the car, and Jennifer took me home. We were halfway there when I realized I had forgotten my phone at the nightclub. I remembered keeping it on the bar, and amidst all the brawls with Steve, I forgot to take it. We again drove to the nightclub, searched the entire bar, but my phone was gone, and so was Steve. It didn't take time to understand that he had stolen my iPhone. I wanted to go to the cops and file a report for my phone being stolen, but I stepped back, because this time I was responsible for all this uncalled trouble. I knew the cops will judge me for flirting with a man just to get some free drinks. I knew they will tell me that none of this would have happened if I didn't cross my limit that night. What scared me even more was that all my pictures were on my phone. And stupidity, I didn't have any kind of passkey on the phone. I am single and live alone, hence never felt the need for it. I kept an eye on my social media accounts for the next few days, but nothing showed up, so I slowly stopped stressing about it. I had given up completely when Jennifer told me to use the Find My Phone app to retrieve the location of my iPhone. Her idea didn't seem bad, so one night after coming home from work, I laid on my bed and started searching for my phone in that app. I decided to log into the Find My Phone app, and I noticed my old iPhone still listed as a device. It said searching next to it, and I figured it would just time out. But part of me was curious to see the results anyway. As I clicked on the searching, the radar started to circle out, trying to locate where it is. I wasn't expecting what happened next. As the searching stopped and the dot revealed the location of my old phone, the ground was swept from under my feet. It was showing my neighborhood, close to my house. I freaked out and sprung on my bed when suddenly I got an email from an unknown ID. As I opened it, my stomach dropped in fear. There was a JPEG attached to the email. The image was of me, standing with my phone, wearing the same nightgown that I am wearing now. Suddenly, a shattering sound of glass took place in my kitchen, and the house went completely dark. I did not doubt that it was Steve, and he has traced my location without any difficulty. I quickly hid in the closet and dialed 911. Slow but loud footsteps started to come close to my room. I couldn't make a sound, so I texted the dispatcher that there's an intruder in my house and I need help. Peeking from the blinds, I saw a pair of boots standing right in front of the closet. I was praying to God to get me out of this situation when the boots went to the left side. I kept staring from the blind, trying to see if he is still in my room, when Steve opened the closet door in one go and laughed like a demon from hell. You can't hide from me. Come on, we have some unfinished business, Lily, or should I say, Catherine, you lying bitch! Saying this, he grabbed me by my hair and pulled me out of the closet as I screamed in pain. He pulled my hair so vigorously that a chunk came off, tearing a red patch of skin from my skull. He then smelled that bunch of hair like crazy and said, "Wow, you do smell nice. Let's go to the bed and have some fun." I kicked and screamed while he forcefully tried to pick me up to drag me to the bed. As he leaned on me, I scratched his face with my long fingernails and poked his eye so severely that blood came out, making him injured. He backed out in pain, and that gave me a chance to fight back. I got up and ran to the kitchen, while Steve screamed at me, cursing me in obscene language. I opened the door and saw my neighbors rushing to my house. They heard my scream and came to the rescue. I collapsed on the porch, saying, "There's an intruder in my bedroom." My neighbor kept a strict eye on Steve, raising his baseball bat until the cops arrived. The cops retrieved my old phone from his pocket and gave it back to me. When the cops were taking him away, he looked at me for one last time and said, "You know it was your fault. You had it coming, Catherine. You are a filthy woman with no character. I know I am at fault, but is it right to think that if a girl is willing to drink with you, she is ready to sleep with you as well?" I accidentally broke my iPhone in college. My hand slipped while I was trying to record a video of the professor's lecture. It fell on the hard classroom floor and shattered beyond repair. Now, the smart thing to do would have been to buy a Samsung or anything other than another iPhone. But I'd already bought a bunch of overpriced Apple products that wouldn't work with anything else, and I didn't want to waste all the dollars I spent on them. I ended up trying to buy an iPhone of the same model as my old one online. It was a pretty old model, so most of my options were used. I didn't mind though. I just needed it to be in relatively good condition so that I could use it for coursework. I found one iPhone listed on sale with such a price tag so cheap that the seller might as well have just thrown it in the trash. I felt a bit suspicious about it at first, but I'd used that website plenty of times and never had a problem before. Plus, it was so cheap, it wouldn't have been much of a loss if I did get cheated anyways. I placed the order for my new used iPhone via my laptop and waited just one day for it to be shipped over to my apartment. It was late in the afternoon when it arrived at my doorstep. The Apple stores were nearing closing time by the time the iPhone arrived, and I didn't really feel like going out that day anyways, so I decided to wait until the next day to get the iPhone wiped at the store. Upon closer inspection, I was surprised with how good of a condition the iPhone I bought was in. I thought for sure that the pictures online were photoshopped to make it look nicer than it really was, but the thing looked almost brand new, save for a few scratches here and there. There were custom engravings on the back of the iPhone too. "To my one and only Sarah, hugs and kisses." I realized that probably meant the phone was at one point a gift from a boyfriend or a girlfriend. Suddenly, the cheap price tag started to make sense. For such an expensive gift to be sold online for such a low price probably meant that Sarah and her significant other had a nasty breakup that she wanted to forget as soon as possible. Without nothing better to do that night, I decided to snoop around the iPhone's content a bit before everything would be deleted. I was curious to see what kind of person this Sarah person was too. I opened the gallery and found hundreds of selfies of a young woman with blonde hair and brown eyes. Most of them was of her posing next to a coffee, lounging around in her house, or striking a pose in front of a store or in the middle of a park. Pretty basic upper middle class white girl stuff, to be honest. A lot of her photos in the beginning also featured her with a good-looking guy who she seemed far too comfortable with to be just a friend. One picture had them both smiling in front of a tree at a park with a heart carved into it. I assumed that the guy was her boyfriend, and as I suspected, pictures featuring him became more and more sparse as time went on. The later pictures that did feature him had him standing a lot further from her than in the earlier ones. It was a scummy thing to do, looking back, but I went to check on some of her chat logs too, out of curiosity. The last message she sent to anybody was to someone named Ben with the text of, "Go fuck yourself, you cheating bastard." So, I got the gist of what happened and closed the phone for the night. The next day I went to the closest Apple store and got the iPhone reset to factory condition. I almost forgot all about Sarah and her cheating boyfriend until I tried to take a picture of my study notes for future reference. When I went to the gallery to see my pictures, one of Sarah's photos was still there. It was the one of her with her presumably now ex-boyfriend standing in front of a tree at a park. But something had changed about it. The boyfriend was still smiling, but Sarah had a sorrowful frown on her face when I distinctly remembered her smiling in the picture before. However, I assumed that I just remembered the photo wrong and that the picture was only there because of a bug. I deleted the photo of Sarah and her ex before going to bed. The next day during class, I checked my iPhone gallery to look at the notes I took the previous night. I found the photo of Sarah and her ex back in the iPhone gallery, but it changed even more. Now, in addition to Sarah frowning, she was also crying tears of blood while her boyfriend's face was blurred out. I stared at it in confusion for what felt like a full minute before the professor called me out. "Miss Sanderson." Yes, sir." "Do pay attention in class and put away your phone, won't you?" "Of course, sir. Sorry, sir." I put away my phone like he instructed, but I couldn't bring myself to pay attention to anything he was saying afterwards. That picture lingered in my mind, eating at me for the entire duration of class. After class was over, I deleted the photo again and went straight back home to take a cold shower. It was raining heavily by the time I went to bed. The image of Sarah crying blood lingered in my mind as I struggled to sleep through the rain and thunder. I woke up the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. I reluctantly checked the iPhone gallery to see if the picture had come back. Sure enough, it was there. This time, the skies behind the couple had turned a shade of dark red. The tree behind them bled from the heart carved into it. And Sarah had a long slit across her throat from which rivers of blood trickled down to stain her white blouse. Enough was enough. I was ready to throw the iPhone away, but before I could remove the SIM card, the sound of Siri's voice stopped me.
"You are 3.3 kilometers away from your destination."
I looked at the screen and saw that the GPS had somehow activated itself. I exited the GPS, but the moment I did, it just came back up again. The location marked on the map was a nearby public park that was only a few minutes away from where I lived. My common sense wrestled with my curiosity as I thought about going to the GPS location. In the end, my curiosity won out. The location was in a public park and it was Saturday morning too, so I thought that I'd be safe no matter what. And if I was lucky, I might finally get to the bottom of what was going on with my iPhone. I drove to the park within a few minutes and followed the path the GPS gave me on foot. At the end of it, I found myself at the very same tree in the photo that kept appearing in the iPhone gallery. The heart carved into it was still visible, with some sort of red liquid trickling out from the edges. I looked down at the foot of the tree and saw a strange indentation in the soil. The previous night's rain had turned the dirt to mud, and it was slowly sliding off something buried underneath the tree. I crouched down to wipe the mud off whatever was under there and immediately regretted it. Hidden under the thin layer of mud was the face of a desiccated corpse that stared straight back at me. I called the police and they came to investigate the body. The case was all over the news in my hometown, and I followed it closely in the following days. Unsurprisingly, the body was identified to be that of Sarah, and the killer was discovered to be her ex-boyfriend, who slit her throat while she slept shortly after she broke up with him. According to the investigation, he used a copy of her house key that he'd given him while they were dating to break in and cut her throat open with a knife from the kitchen. I still have the iPhone with me, but the photo of Sarah and her boyfriend disappeared after I called the police to the park. I can only hope that means Sarah's spirit is at peace now, wherever she may be.